I think I've related to you all sort of my first known experience with painting. I was a 5-year-old kid in I love to call it a one-room schoolhouse. It technically was. It had a divider down the middle, so it had 4 grades in it. But it was a one-room schoolhouse in Altura, of all places, Colorado, which you probably wouldn't find on the map anymore. And but up in the front wall, above the chalkboards, on either side, left and right, were portraits of Abraham Lincoln and the Smithsonian George Washington, the unfinished one. And I said Smithsonian, it should be the Athenaeum George Washington. I guess it's shared between the Athenaeum Library in Boston and the Smithsonian, but that attracted my attention as a 5-year-old kid. And so I would stare at it, and I would stare at that unfinished corner, and and of course my muscle sort of got into closing it out, wondering what it would look like finished. And so of course in my brain, I guess marks. I was looking for marks on there, and I could see some brush marks around those edges. And that got my mind moving to the nose. Somehow or other, it was the nose on George Washington that was rendered. And so I looked back and forth between the unfinished and the rendered. And I guess I've been trying to figure out how you get from one place to the other, that paint thing to that sense of the real. How do you do that in paint? I guess that's been on my mind ever since. Why do I say that? Well, Richard, some time ago, actually put this forward, and I really don't find this one of the more easy things to talk about in some ways. And so much of what happens in painting is personal that way. But the real question for him was well, let me just read it. A painter's personal journey, he says, the why and how of art. Why does one, this is the real question, why does one paint, and how does one go about expressing that in a chosen medium? Hopefully not a station one arrives at, but a manner of travel. All those things are interesting, but why does one paint? And how do you go about expressing that? So that's an assumption that you paint because you have a particular thing to say. When Gamel's speaking, he said that he paints the way he paints because for him, he wanted to express some things. He called it self-expression. When you're looking at a painter, an impressionist painter, for example, that form of self-expression, that idea of coming from ideas in your mind, you might say literary ideas or philosophical or psychological ideas, and trying to say what you're, pictorialize, shall we say, that thing. That form of self-expression is different. It's not quite the same thing, but nevertheless, in any case, you're looking at nature. If your response, if I remember Gary Hoffman, I hope you'll forgive me, Gary, for talking about you this way, but you were talking about as a kid, you're walking down the streets in Detroit and just being overawed by the color of the trees, if I remember your statement right, and something like that. There's something compelling about the visual music, the visual, just simply the beauty. It might be, some people will say a sunset or flowers or something else. For somebody else, it might be form. There's an intrigue, some level of intrigue involved in the seeing, right? And so, I suppose that's why the world breaks down into two worlds, right? Rather straightforwardly, people want to be illustrators of something, an idea, and if they're also visually oriented, in other words, they love the visual world, they will be that will be coming forward as part of their package, right? I do find that there's a tendency to be too heavily oriented toward one. You might even say toward one or the other, but I think in the end, as I've said before, your job really is a visual one, not an idea-based one. And yet, we're humans with minds, and we see things, objects, and every time you have 2 or 3 objects in a picture, you have something like a narrative. And some people want to think it's clever to have two or three things in a picture you can't figure out even what in the world they're in that same room for. In the world of say haiku poetry, it's not an unusual thing to make a statement about a snail crawling across a stone, leaving its track, and then hearing a bird shrieking in the distance as sort of a counter image. And that there's an intrigue in what those things say in relation to each other. So I'm not faulting that idea, but I'm saying that you certainly could, make efforts to do something that who knows what the heck it means. Whereas most of the time when you're putting a still life together or whatever, some level of an idea occurs to you. When you begin, I was collecting all that stuff, and somebody I showed earlier, that image of the what Gamble called a pukid with with the compote in the foreground and the rug in the background. It evolved into a kind of a bacchanal, where it's kind of like a little bit of a party. Ultimately, that encouraged me to tip over the mug in the foreground, spill the wine, to mess up the doily. The story began to actually be a factor. So, but I find that these things happen in the course of a picture, and I wouldn't tell you I could tell you for sure what my as it were my sense of life is, my life theme in that way. I don't know that I have one, and I don't think I've ever sat down with an objective idea of I got to tell the world this very important thing that either I am or I possess in my sense of life. I do like that. That sense of life idea comes from Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand, to those who are her dear lovers, but. As I've been corrected, but that's actually a worthy little read, But what comes through your painting in any case is a sense of life. But yeah, and so when you're painting, even when you're just, I've learned recently, spent all my life trying to figure out how to write poetry, and suddenly it's come to me that it's a sound model, that it's sound oriented, and at least for me. And when I do sound, that's great. That's interesting. Suddenly there's a flow of ideas that are out of me, right? So they're a form of self-expression, inevitably, and they inevitably reflect my whatever soulfulness I have. But I don't know how to make this much more of a question. There's so much of a wandering thing. You see why I would hesitate to even talk about this. But, you may be spending your life searching out why you do this. We do have, admittedly, a sort of a compulsion. And I think most people do. I mean, you're interested in science for a reason. You're sort of compelled to pursue something like that. And beauty is one of those things. And as I said, that could be primarily for you color beauty or light or something like that. I know that when I paint a picture, the satisfaction really starts. That is to say, the pleasure of being there really starts when the light hits. When I see light happening in the picture, I know who I am and I know where to go. And that's an interesting question. How much of your method is actually simply a result of the evolution of your idea, your sense of life idea, or that thing that gives you the greatest pleasure. Probably really is. The Michelangelo in form versus Monet and color light, or maybe I should say light, and then I should talk about Degas color, right? It's a funny thing because Degas and most good painters are a well-mixed bag of things. If it weren't, the patterning and all the rest of that stuff that happens in Degas is crucial to who he is. It really comes through. But it's a fun thing to talk about, and I spent enough time probably today just meandering on about it. But it does matter in the end, though, that what happens in the arts, what happens as you're painting, is coming from you. In other words, you look, even if you've just set up a still life, even while you're setting up a still life, if you look at it and say, well, that's cell, what is that? But if you look at it and you keep on moving the composition until it finally gets to that point where you're making a connection with it, that's where you want to be. That's that special place. And I even tell students, don't even start painting something if you're not compelled by its beauty, by what is it about it? There's something worthy. What is that worthiness? But it's something of value. And your job is actually to bring value to people, not just simply to, get down to the bank as quick as you can. So hopefully that's that's of some interest. And so enjoy that. Chew on that for a while and get back to me. I'll talk more about these sorts of things, but as you can see, I'm a bit of a wanderer when it comes to this stuff. And we spend our life trying to it's a sorting process all through your life. You turn these things over and over, like the soil, right? And looking for answers. And yeah, and keep painting. Do subscribe, comment, share, and shall see you next time.